So in our last episode, we discussed food noise, and many of you felt seen. But one viewer asked a critical question. How do I know if it's food noise or emotional eating? That question matters because strategy depends on mechanism. If you treat emotion like appetite, you misapply the solution. And if you treat normal hunger like pathology, you create shame. For many of us on a GLP-1 journey, the signals once felt indistinguishable. Today, we clarify that distinction. So here is why this matters. If you misidentify the driver, you misapply the solution. And that creates frustration. In this episode, we will define clearly normal hunger, food noise, and emotional eating. And we'll explain why GLP-1 medications offer quiet one, but not automatically the other. We'll discuss why early in the journey the signals blur. And we'll set a clear boundary with clinical eating disorders. And if you stay to the end, you'll have a simple framework to recognize which signal you're experiencing and what to do next. For those new here, I am George. I'm a biological scientist by education and training, and I'm also on my own GLP-1 journey. And this channel blends clinical research with lived experience. And as always, this content is for educational purposes only. It's not medical advice, and it's not a substitute for individualized professional care. And before we define food noise or emotional eating, we must define normal hunger. Normal hunger is physiologic. It is gradual. You feel the hunger pangs, and those pangs come from the gut, not from intrusive thought. In clinical terms, this is homeostatic hunger. It is regulated through gut-brain signaling, ghrelin, leptin, and the vagal nerve pathways. Energy may dip. Most foods sound acceptable. And after adequate intake, it resolves. This is physiology, not failure. Especially in GLP-1, some hunger returning can be absolutely normal. So we must not confuse healthy appetite with relapse. Now, food noise is different. It's not homeostatic. It's hedonic, meaning it does not begin in the gut, it begins in the brain, specifically the reward circuitry, dopamine-driven salience pathways. And salience simply means this matters. It is the brain's way of saying, hey, pay attention to this. So it often presents as intrusive food thoughts, cue-driven wanting. It can occur when the stomach is completely quiet. In research, this overlaps with constructs like hedonic hunger and external eating. And hedonic does not mean immoral. It simply means reward-driven. This is primarily a reward pathway phenomenon. Now, emotional eating is different again. Unlike hunger, it does not begin at the gut. Unlike food noise, it does not begin with reward salience alone. It begins with emotion, stress, loneliness, boredom, fatigue, shame. The emotion comes first, the eating follows. Sometimes it happens so quickly you don't even notice the emotion until afterward. And in clinical research, this pattern is actually measured with validated instruments like the DEPQ, the Dutch Eating Behavior Questionnaire, or the Emotional Appetite Questionnaire, or the Emotional Eating Scale. And these types of tools assess eating in response to affective states, not metabolic need. Emotional eating is not about weakness. It's about coping strategy, a way the nervous system attempts to regulate discomfort. Food can soothe, it can distract, it can reward. And in the short term, it often works, but the relief is temporary, and the underlying emotion remains. Emotional eating is about regulation, using food to shift internal state. So now let's place all three side by side, because once you see them together, the distinction becomes much more clear. All right, so I guess I need to extend a small apology, just slightly. My nerd gene activated, and when that happens, I seem to want to build a table or a graph. Okay, but this one I think will help. So let's place them side by side. Normal hunger is gut-driven, homeostatic. Food noise is reward-driven, hedonic. Emotional eating is emotion-driven, regulatory. Now look at the origin, then look at the trigger, then look at the resolution. Hunger resolves after adequate intake. Food noise may persist. Emotional eating provides temporary relief, but not lasting regulation. So the mechanism determines the strategy. So early in the GLP-1 journey, distinction is difficult. When metabolism is dysregulated, as it is in most of us that start on this journey, hunger signaling is amplified. Reward pathways are hypersensitive. Cravings feel urgent. Sleep disruption increases salience. Stress increases reactivity. Everything feels loud. Now add on top of that the psychological layer. Shame, self-blame, identity distortion. When biology drives appetite, but we interpret it as weakness, confusion increases. And in that state, food noise and emotional eating, they intertwine. Signals blur. This is why early on it can feel impossible to tell the difference. But here's the hope. As metabolic stability improves, volume decreases. GLP-1 lowers the biological noise floor. And when volume decreases, clarity increases. And when clarity increases, agency returns. And when this agency returns, shame begins to dissolve and confusion goes away. And in my own experience, early on, the signals definitely were blurred. Food noise and emotional eating felt indistinguishable. And there was urgency, and shame amplified both. When appetite felt chaotic, everything felt personal. But as metabolic stability improved, and I'm very thankful for that, something shifted. The volume decreased, the urgency softened, and clarity began to emerge. And then I began to see that much of what I had labeled as emotional weakness was actually dysregulated appetite signaling. And that realization changed everything. But not all patterns disappeared. Some emotional habits remained. And those required attention, not shame, attention. And stability gave me clarity. And clarity restored agency, and agency made growth possible, and I was able to move on and learn. Let's talk briefly about mood. GLP-1 medications are not antidepressants. They're approved for metabolic regulation, appetite control, glycemic stability, weight reduction. However, GLP-1 receptors are present in brain regions involved in reward and stress processing, and that matters. As metabolic health improves, several downstream effects can also occur. Inflammation may decrease. Sleep often improves. Glycemic variability decreases. Reward signaling becomes more stable, and when physiology stabilizes, internal experience also stabilizes. And some individuals, myself included, report improved mood. But we must be precise. Mood improvement is likely indirect, a downstream effect of improved regulation. And GLP-1 certainly may quiet the biological noise, but psychological patterns sometimes require additional work. And there's no shame in that. Now let's go from explanation to application. Perhaps what you all been waiting for. So if the driver is primarily food noise, respond biologically. Structure reduces noise. So prioritize protein-forward meals. Plan your intake, reduce decision fatigue, reduce environmental cues where possible. Use delay, not denial. Say to yourself, if I still want it in 20 minutes, I'll decide then. Protect sleep. Sleep loss amplifies reward sensitivity. These strategies target the mechanism. And for a deeper dive into food noise specifically, please watch our previous episode. The link will be in the description. Now, if the driver is primarily emotional eating, the strategy shifts from suppression to regulation. First, slow down. Before eating, ask gently of yourself, what am I feeling? Name the emotion, not perfectly, just honestly. Research shows that labeling emotion reduces its intensity. Then create a pause. Not denial, just a pause. And in that pause, choose regulation instead of reflex. And that might look like making a cup of tea and sitting quietly, taking a short walk to discharge stress. engaging in something wholesome and absorbing like drawing, painting, reading, music, calling a friend, doing something unselfish for someone you care about. These are not distractions. They're alternative regulation strategies. In clinical practice, this falls under behavioral substitution and distress tolerance. The goal is not to eliminate emotion, it's to expand your response options. Regulation is a skill, and skills can be learned, and learning takes repetition. It doesn't take perfection. And on a GLP-1, you may experience both: quieted noise, residual emotional patterns. On GLP-1, many people experience both. The noise quiets, but emotional patterns may remain. That doesn't mean that medication has failed. It means healing is layered. First layer, metabolic stability. GLP-1 can lower the biological noise floor. Second layer, emotional literacy. Learning to name internal states, learning to regulate without self-attack. And third layer, narrative correction, removing the shame story. If emotional eating patterns require additional psychological work, that's not failure. That's healthcare. Layered health requires layered strategy. And here's where we need to make an important distinction. Emotional eating does not automatically mean an eating disorder. These are not interchangeable terms. Eating disorders are clinical diagnoses. They involve patterns such as recurrent loss of control, marked distress, compensatory behaviors, or functional impairment. Conditions like binge eating disorder, bulimia nervosa, anorexia nervosa, or avoidance restrictive food intake disorder, which involves significant restriction, and these require professional evaluation. If you are experiencing repeated loss of control or significant distress, seeking care is appropriate, and there is no shame in that. Again, hear me out. Psychological treatment is not weakness, it's healthcare. So let's bring all this together. Normal hunger is gut-driven. Food noise is reward-driven. Emotional eating is regulation-driven. And early in metabolic dysregulation, the signals blur. As stability improves, the noise quiets. GLP-1 can lower the biological volume, but growth comes from learning how to respond. And if you struggle to tell the difference, you're not broken. You were navigating layered signals in a dysregulated system. Understanding restores direction, and direction reduces shame. And growth then is possible. And if this has helped you, consider watching our food noise episode. The link will be in the description. And please consider liking and subscribing if this kind of clinical clarity has been helpful to you. And share this with someone who may need this distinction. So stay curious, my friends. Be patient with your body and be at peace. This is George with GLP-1s for Seniors. And God willing, I will see you next time.